I think our biggest vulnerability as autistic women is actually that we're hidden in plain sight a lot of the time. Autism was seen as more of a male condition. And then the clinicians that were aware that autistic girls are also autistic may not have had the right tools or clinical experience or awareness of how to spot us, how to diagnose us. For autistic women, we know that past generations and past decades, that just didn't happen, which left us actually with a real fight on our hands to navigate the world. So yeah, it wasn't until I was 32 that I was officially diagnosed, and that was by Dr. Judith Gould at the Lorna Wings Centre. Now, Dr. Judith Gould, an absolute hero of mine, not just personally, but professionally as well. If it wasn't for Dr. Judith Gould and the late Dr. Lorna Wing, we, as a world, we wouldn't know that autistic people with speech were autistic. So in 1981, Dr. Lorna Wing and Dr. Judith Gould coined the term Asperger's, which is my official diagnosis, Asperger's syndrome.
Which is my diagnosis also, at age 46. But yeah, I always knew I was different.
But that kind of diagnostic term, first of all, isn't in the diagnostic manual anymore. That was taken out. Everyone's just diagnosed autistic. So that's times have moved on. Diagnosed by Dr. Judith Gould. Incredible. And I'm so glad it was her. I'm so glad it was her, not only because of the kind, compassionate and very matter-of-fact way that she diagnosed me, but I'm so glad it's her because you get questioned and you don't get believed a lot sometimes when you're autistic, and if people say, well, you don't look it, people don't tend to not believe you. And actually, if another clinician was to say, oh, no, I don't believe you're autistic, I say, well, actually, the lady that coined the term diagnosed me, so I know I am. Often when I tell people I'm autistic, they kind of say, oh, you don't look it. I don't know what that means. How am I supposed to look autistic? I don't really know. And just say we haven't hung around long enough, because if you hang around long enough, you will see the autistic behaviours, you will see the autistic traits and the wonderful things being autistic can bring, and the huge challenges that can bring too.
Every person with autism should be made welcome to contribute to the world as much as those who consider themselves intellectually superior. It's very profound.
I think people just see the word Asperger's or autism, but what they don't see is what it's like for
life up till then was a complete confusion, just winging it. And we all wing it. I think the older we get, we realise, particularly in work circles, everyone's just winging it. Everyone's just trying to do their best. But by the time you're 27, you shouldn't kind of be winging it, buying a pint of milk. You shouldn't have to be winging it, having to make a conversation with someone. You shouldn't have to be winging it when you go out of an evening, relationships and friendships, and you're just improvising constantly.
It was extremely isolating. And initially, of course, when you don't fit in and you're being picked on, you blame yourself. So there's a lot of self-doubt and there's a lot of self-persecution. You don't think that because you're the minority, you expect the majority to be right, and therefore everything they accuse you of, you stand accused of, and it's your fault.
It's not going to get you liked at all. So I started to try and fit in a lot of masking. And actually, I think my masking was so extreme that it led me to not fitting in. I can remember dyeing my hair bright white blonde, and I thought that was a really good idea. And constantly wearing fake tan, almost like an armour. And loads of makeup, tons of makeup, piercings. It was just constantly trying to not be myself. I felt safer not being myself. And I really, really struggled at school. Am I saying the right thing? Is this what I'm supposed to do? It's like everyone else had got the script. And I think that's why my special interest and love of acting and creative arts was from a very young age. And that's because it's the only time in my life that I had the script. I knew what was going to happen next. I knew what somebody else was going to say in return. I even knew what I had to wear and when it stopped and when it started. And that was really, really reassuring. And if you messed up and if you get your lines wrong, or if it's not said in the way that it's supposed to have been said, someone yells cut and you get to try again and again and again. And performing is so much easier than real life. And I've always felt much more comfortable on stage than I do buying a pint of milk. And that's been quite a challenge.
Down a sort of self-training program, and by the time I was diagnosed in my 40s,
you channeled all that obsessiveness, didn't you, into how you did the show, all the facts you knew about, and you were so knowledgeable about your subject. Well, you still are.
Well,
Passionate about it.
yeah, the passion is one thing. I mean, the knowledge, one of the benefits of the condition is that we have good retentive memory and we have good pattern forming skills. So we see connections between things which strengthen that recall. So, and of course, in my job, that's an asset. So I remember things that I read when I was 6 or 7 years old, and I talk about them on Springwatch. So, being able to recall things that way, and that's not a skill that's unique to me. That's something which is a trait which is quite common in the autistic community. So
Our knowledge usually outweighs our confidence. Accessibility isn't always as obvious as audio loops, easy read, accessible stairs and ramps, and sign language. Sometimes accessibility is a set of bespoke, discrete measures taken to ensure that an autistic professional can work without pain or distress in the workplace. I have to be strategic every day as a working autistic woman. I dream of being full-time employed, yet my experiences of full-time employment to date haven't made full-time work accessible. I have had to remain self-employed because it means I can be in charge of my accessibility.
Long-term memory is very good, to the point where I described a gentleman that I remembered at my nanny's house, so my nan, and I said to my nan and my mum, I said, oh yeah, I remember meeting my great granddad, because he was a short man and he was slender and he had a brown suit with pinstripes on and he drank Guinness. And my mum and nan were pretty outstanding by this recollection of mine, because I only met him once, and when I did, I wasn't even 2 years old. So my photographic long-term memory is pretty good, but short-term memory is pretty rubbish. As you might see, I'm probably going to forget. I've had to write it down on a bit of napkin. My bullet points of what to write, because I will forget short-term memory, but long-term memory. So I could kind of fill in a lot in the diagnostic room about a lot of things, and one of my earlier memories as well was before school age, so I must have been kind of 3, 4, that kind of age, and my mum trying to get me to go to preschool, to nursery, and I can remember having this yellow anorak raincoat thing, and it had big crayons, so it was the 80s, had big crayons all over it, and I can remember this, and I can remember getting there, and everyone else, all the other kids just kind of knew what to do, and I didn't really know what to do, and in the corner we had this, like a red phone box. To me it was massive, but remember I was 3 and I'm only 5'2" now, so it's probably just this big. But it was like this huge wooden phone box, and I would kind of go in the phone box and pretend to make phone calls because I could shut the door and just be on my own in there. And I really struggled.
Autistic and disabled people have no choice but to be innovative in their everyday life, as life in general isn't set up for their necessity. If necessity is the mother of all innovation, I believe new solutions and countrywide progress is likely the daughter of diversity and disability. We have already discussed the importance of an autistic girl's interests being valued as expertise rather than obsession. As she becomes an autistic woman, others need to value this expertise as they would any other professional's work, not constantly see her as an expert by experience, rather than an expert in her own right.
Authentically. And that masking, not only on an emotional level, but then on a physical level as well, can really, really damage and does damage your self-esteem. So a diagnosis, I think, is the first day of the rest of your life, and it helps you kind of go, okay, under all of this, who am I? I don't think it's a diagnosis is discovering yourself. I think a diagnosis gives you the opportunity and the confidence to start discovering everything you're not. And that's even more important. You become like, imagine you go to a new house and it's got a new wall, and then year after year, or even day after day, you're wallpapering that wall, different wallpaper, thinking, oh, what's the next person going to like? Wallpapering it on. And before you know it, your wall's thick, and you're digging away, going, oh, I don't even like that wallpaper, and you're digging away until you get back to your original self. And that's quite a strange metaphor, I appreciate, but that's kind of what it felt like, having to remove all of these layers of wallpaper that I didn't need. The wall was perfectly fine. I didn't need to do that. I was pleasing everybody else, eroding at my own self-esteem at the same time. And the way we kind of get our self-esteem, the way I kind of got around that masking was to realise that the whole time I'm not developing my sense of self, I'm not developing my self-esteem, I'm not developing my self-confidence, and I would not describe myself as a confident person at all, even now, years after diagnosis. But I'm authentic.
Thinking more broadly about the importance of diagnosis, how about the autistic girl's sense of self, her identity? Without a sense of self, she cannot create a self-identity. Without self-identity, she will struggle to grow self-confidence. No self-confidence leads to struggling to value herself, her boundaries, and her happiness. These are all important ingredients in the plight of safeguard. Can professionals support the autistic girl to build up her self-esteem? If she is still unsure of her sense of self and sense of identity, that could be due to a late diagnosis and a life of masking. If the leap between idolizing others and appreciating herself is too big a jump, start small. Give her someone like herself to look up to until she learns to appreciate and recognize something good in herself. The autistic girl's family. You could have a discussion about them and maybe do research as a project for her, using worksheets that are about self-identity and interest is always a great way to build her confidence and help her unpeel the various layers of characteristics that she has felt she needs to copy in order to get by in life. Clinical assessment teams should be aware that the autistic girl that visits is likely to be masking when she visits the clinic. Diagnosis may therefore take more time, more appointments, and different environment observation than expected. I can recall, a professional once asking me how on earth I could be autistic and enjoy acting. His perception was that an autistic female could not possibly act, as it would require putting myself in someone else's shoes. My reply was, I don't do that, but I've learned how to allow a character to walk in my shoes instead. If the autistic girls you support tend to assume that others have the same information in their brains as they do they really appreciate how many things they can do, their talents and wisdom, and how many things they know that others do not? They may have often assumed that people have the same intellect and skills as they do, when maybe others do not. If the autistic girl or woman you support struggles to understand her talents, value, and intelligence, this would well be why. It is important their support team helps them recognize their strengths as well as their challenges.